What's up, everyone? My name is Luke Kohen, and I'm going to share a bit about the wild, mystical journey I've been on as a human being for the last 20 years and how my life absolutely transformed my last year of college into who I've become. And it started with a very intense healing crisis and led into a series of peak spiritual experiences, including a near-death experience. So yeah, thanks for coming on this journey. So I was born and raised in New York City, in Staten Island and Brooklyn, and lower middle class family, very artistic folks, and the culture of New York and the culture of America, lots of self-destructive tendencies were a big part of it. And I grew up in a very unsafe sort of neighborhood. I was like one of maybe 4 white kids on the basketball team, Jewish last name, but a part of like a Roman Catholic church. So I didn't really know where I belonged. And so the place that I find a lot of us tend to go to is like whatever the mainstream culture is, we can find some sense of belonging, even if it's not correct for us. And so for me, basketball, martial arts became a big part of my outlet, and then also self-destructive tendencies. So I began consuming substances pretty young. And I had this sort of dichotomy between the part of me that wanted to cultivate some form of mastery through martial arts. That was my spirituality. And this very competitive athletic side of me that was very driven, and then the part of me that was numbing and self-destructive through substances. And so that was kind of like this dynamic tension inside of my being. And, long story short, in the sense of that particular pocket, I got into an upstate SUNY college on a fine art scholarship. I was a graffiti artist and street artist, and was one of like the few people from the city that went to this upstate school, especially for fine art. And 2 weeks into my freshman year of college, 9/11 happened, and I lost my brother-in-law, who was probably the safest person in my life amidst the kind of chaotic family dynamic that I grew up with. So he was like my safe place. He was my rock. He was my big bro. And so that was pretty devastating. And that shock, I didn't really have the tools to process the grief. So I doubled down in all the things I was already doing for years, which was pushing my body really hard through training in martial arts and basketball and track, and also abusing substance. And the combination of that over about 4 years led me to my healing crisis. And so my last year of uni, my body broke down and I manifested a kind of spinal injury. And I went from being this agile 22-year-old to walking with a cane overnight, pretty much. And I got very depressed because my whole identity was being an athlete and being a martial artist. I was training to be an MMA fighter before it was like cool, before UFC was really big. And I studied a really rare esoteric martial art called Vada, which means to slay or to kill with open hands in Sanskrit from the ancient Himalayas. And there's only 3 places you can learn it, which is Staten Island, Florida, and wherever it came from in India, because the person that taught my teacher like disappeared after my teacher's uncle, who's the founder of it, like he just like disappeared after he gave him the final initiation. And so there's like all this legend and mysticism surrounding the martial art. And I think the combination of like the repetitive stress movements is like this very whipping motions. So it was for like skinny body types to be able to like fight multiple opponents and really hurt people pretty severely. So you learn these like marma points or aki points where you could like shut down organ systems or kill somebody. And there was kind of like a sorcery side of it. So here I am, this like city kid learning this like crazy esoteric, almost sorcery martial art, running with gangs, have a good family, but again, this dichotomy of self-destructiveness and a desire to cultivate myself. And I'm now walking with a cane at 22, and I have no outlet. I have no wholesome way of moving, because I like the flow states in basketball. I like the flow states of training in martial arts. There was something wholesome, even if I went about it in this really intense sort of type A way. And I didn't like cocaine. I didn't like alcohol. I definitely liked cannabis at the time. And so when I became sort of semi-crippled, I didn't get, like, it was like the dissatisfaction I already had with substances was even worse, because it didn't bring me any relief. And I realized that my actual relief was through the martial arts and through my athleticism. So when that was gone, I got really depressed. And I was trying to reconcile with the loss of identity as an athlete and come to terms with my situation. I went to experts, I went to doctors, I went to everyone, and kind of got gaslit a bit of like, we don't know what's wrong with you. You're going to need a hip replacement when you're 30, no one had any answers for me. So I had to kind of start to go inward and to make sense of my situation. And I had bought this cast iron teapot for myself as a birthday gift. Like my sister gave me, I think it was a TJ Maxx certificate. And there was this dope cast iron teapot. And I was like, oh, that's coming home with me. And just started getting into tea maybe 6 months before this happened, just spontaneously. And one day I was drinking tea out of a cast iron teapot in this early stage of this experience. And I dropped into a spontaneous meditation and accessed what I call the living stillness of the universe for the first time. And everything fell away. And there was no thoughts, there was no time. There was just pure, unbroken presence. And I saw a vision of myself as a Taoist hermit in a cave somewhere in China. And it's like my eyes opened, and then I saw where my soul had been with me my whole life up until that point. I remember my near-death experience from 4. I remembered peak experiences with psychedelics as a teenager, really intense traumas. It all, like, I just saw where my soul had been with me my whole life up until that point, and that part of me merged. And that, what I call that living stillness, is like the backdrop of everything. It's this complete lack of stimulation, complete emptiness of thought and identity. And I came back from that experience completely changed. And like, this is what I've been looking for my whole life. This is what appealed to me within what I was trying to find through, like, what I would touch in flow states in martial arts and basketball, what I would touch in the peak of a psychedelic experience. It was like all those experiences paled in comparison to what had happened spontaneously in that window of time. It could have been an hour, it could have been 30 minutes. And I came back with this feeling that the yogis describe in the Vedic traditions of what's called moksha, which is like a burning desire for enlightenment. And I was just like, oh my God, this is it. I have to dedicate my life to this feeling, whatever that was. And basically, a few days later, I was given a copy of Autobiography of a Yogi. I read that book in like a week, gave up eating meat, watching TV, drinking alcohol, doing cocaine, smoking cannabis. And I slowly began to disaffiliate from my fraternity and start to go over to Ithaca to try to find monks to talk to make sense of what was happening to my life. And yeah, I didn't know anyone living like a yogic or mystical lifestyle at all. The one person I found out that was like my childhood babysitter, my mom's best friend's daughter. And while I was reading Autobiography of a Yogi, she was actually living in a Himalayan cave under the tutelage of her guru. And there was nobody else in my life that had any context for what the heck was happening to me. And so I graduate college, I go on one college interview, and I'm like, no, this is not for me. This is never going to be satisfying for me. So I waited tables and practiced my yoga that I was starting to learn. And I went to India for yoga teacher training. And that was in 2007. And yoga was the only thing that gave me any sense of relief with my body. I couldn't run, I couldn't jump, I was walking with a cane. And I started to walk without pain again, to the point where I could wait tables within maybe 2 months of practicing yoga, or not practicing yoga, 2 months since I had that peak experience. Something shifted and my body started to heal, and then yoga improved it. And then I started to heal myself gradually. And through the process of starting to heal myself, I started to awaken dormant gifts. I started to remember more of, let's say, my soul's history, of other lineages, other lifetimes. And it was a bit disorienting at times, and I was really thirsty. I was definitely in my seeker. And going to India was profound. I had encounters with some really wild, mystical dudes, and babas is what they call them, and a crazy adventure through South India with two German guys after my YTT, and we went to all these different temples throughout South India, and I ended up going to meet this friend, this childhood babysitter in Varanasi, and I go to email her, and she's sitting behind me emailing me. And like, of all the cafes in Varanasi, we went to the same one to email each other after she got noticed that I was coming to India and had returned from her pilgrimage to the Himalayas and her time in the caves. And so we turn around and we're like, what the heck? We had just emailed each other. We go down to sit by the Ganga, 2 pink river dolphins pop up. she's like, I haven't seen river dolphins in 6 years. And she brings me to her guru, and I meet with him, and he's a very simple householder, nothing fancy, not like a big ashram or anything, just a simple householder, 2-story little, flat. And we start going through some yogic teachings, and then I go the next day, and at the end of our time together, he gives me a name, and he says, what is your name? Again, I'm like, Luke. And he says, Luke, Alokananda. And I'm like, are you giving me a name? He said, be happy. And my friend Joala at the time, she's like, he doesn't do that unless you've been with him for a year. That's very strange. I've never seen him out of like the 6 years I've been with him. He's never given anyone a name after like 2 meetings. And so I went on the rest of my pilgrimage, and I came back from New York with this long Jesus beard. And everyone thought I was crazy because I had been gone for like a year in India after graduating uni. Most people go on internships or whatever, And I come home, and I'm fully, like a full yogi hippie. And I start studying Ayurveda, and I start doing, private yoga classes, and I start cooking Ayurvedic food. So I got really into the study of Ayurveda. And Ayurveda is an ancient healing system from India, similar to Chinese medicine for that culture. And I got really obsessed with herbs and studying herbs and the food and understanding we have these unique constitutions. And I'm like, okay, mind you, I'm still trying to heal. Like, I'm not by any means 100% better. I still can't jump or run. I'm walking, I can do asana, I'm slowing down, but I still missed basketball and missed playing basketball, and was trying to reconcile all these peak experiences that I was having in India and these sort of spiritual awakening since that first one, to the point where the astrologer that I see in Rishikesh before I come back, I go to see this guy, and I'm fully clothed with, covered, all my tattoos covered. And he's like, show me where the ones are on your arm, and show me. He knew where all my tattoos were on my body without seeing them. Looks at my chart, and he goes, if you cultivate power in this lifetime to hurt, you will be humbled through your body. You must give everything to God. And I'm just like sobbing, because I had been training in martial arts to hurt since I was 13. And he's saying, if you cultivate power to hurt, you're going to be destroyed, basically, through your body. And that's what had happened. So it was so validating. And he said, you need to give all of your gifts to God, and you're meant to be a writer, a speaker, and a healer, in so many words. And so I go back, and I go through this really awful breakup with my partner that I was with. And mind you, we had gone on this kind of cool journey of transitioning out of sort of mainstream culture together, where when I got sober and got into yoga, she also went on that journey with me. And so I had a companion who was also transitioning out of sort of mainstream consciousness and self-destructive tendencies and, all the stuff that we have to deal with in our culture. But it was still codependent and toxic in many ways, as awesome as it was to have some accompaniment. And we started to unravel, and through studying Ayurveda and getting really interested in plants, I found out about ayahuasca through a book called 2012, The Return of Quetzalcoatl, written by Daniel Penchback, who ended up becoming a friend years later. But at the time, it wasn't popular like it is now. This is 2008. I go through the breakup. I go down to Costa Rica to heal in pursuit of trying to find ayahuasca. And I'm living as a little resident yoga chef and yoga teacher in this jungle in Cahuita, Costa Rica in 2008. And eventually I find the medicine, and I drink ayahuasca for the first time, and next opening happens on the path. This is like year 2 out of 20. And I remember the arc of the journey, and sort of every facet of what it means to be a human being was being shown to me, from like culture to like birth and death. There were some babies that were like sleeping behind their moms during the ceremony, so I'd kind of get pulled back from this intense spiritual, astral, psychedelic spaces to the sound of a baby crying and suckling on its mom's breast, and being like, wow, we all start out that way. I mean, it sounds not so profound, but when you're in that kind of journey space, it is like, so everything was being revealed to me around the nature of humanity, what it means to be a human being and be a soul on the planet. And I got this really deep vision and for a production company, and how I was shown these sort of eco villages around the world, like the one that I was staying at, which is a community on the Pacific side of Costa Rica at the time. And I saw all these bright lights from around sort of the universe incarnating onto the earth, and how their presence on the earth would change everything, and that I had a role to play in helping create like a safe culture for them to arrive to, and that I had to do my version of what I was experiencing and what I was seeing at this eco village. So I went back to New York City, very activated. Sweat Lodge was more powerful for me in some ways than ayahuasca and peyote. So I basically got thrusted into a full initiatic tribal gathering where I was with a bunch of really powerful Native American peoples from Mexico and Colombia that were sharing their medicines for the very first time under the Eagle Condor prophecies. And so I was, again, one of a few non-Native people that were a part of these Eagle Condor ceremonies. And they were sharing their medicines for the first time. They were sharing peyote and their songs, and they were sharing ayahuasca and their songs and their mythology. And they were joining these two sort of mythologies and practices for the first time ever. And then how they had the same prophecies. So I was a part of this sort of pre-2012 prophecy gathering. And I was initiated into all these shamanic First Nation technologies and medicines for the first time. And when I did Sweat Lodge, I felt like I was home. I was like, okay, this is the church I had been looking for. I was raised Roman Catholic, even though I had a Jewish last name. And in the third round of my Sweat Lodge experience, my brother-in-law came to me, the one that had passed in 9/11, as real as another person holding my hand, like physically. And he said, I'm so proud of you, keep going. And my view on death shattered completely. And I came out of that experience of like everything I've read in Castaneda, everything I've read about spirit world, everything I've been learning from the mystics is real. And I touched it and I tasted it and I kept touching and tasting it. And I've been around these powerful teachers and masters, but it was like having that direct experience with my brother-in-law on the other side of the veil was just really touched me in a deep way. And so I came back with this vision for a production company that would lead to creating an eco village. And I didn't know how I was going to do it. I didn't know what I was doing. I was living in my apartment for the first time on my own after college, after India, after all these things, trying to make my way in the world as like a yogi. And I was roommates with a childhood friend who was like a really successful professional musician now, but at the time it wasn't. And I met one of my best friends who I'm still really close with today, Sri Kala, aka Karel. Shout out to Karel. And he had been a Hare Krishna monk for 6 years, grew up in Brooklyn, hip hop artist as well, producer. And we met and we just had this really profound soul connection. And we created a production company and we started to meet community and build events around consciousness and sobriety. Not that it was like labeling it, so it just happened to be sober, but we didn't like promote it as that. And we started to do these transformational festival-like events in New York City, in warehouses and kirtans and dance parties, and meet this whole crazy community. And we started to reunite these different subcultures and genres of scenes under one umbrella. It's like Burning Man and medicine communities and dance communities and yoga communities do these open mics. And this is where I entered the next phase of my journey of being like a community gatherer and event producer and sort of culture steward. And it was a lot of hard lessons, obviously, a lot of attention, a lot of responsibility. And eventually I ended up leaving New York in 2012 after doing this for 3 years. And it was, burning the midnight oil. I was going deeper with my Native American teachers, hosting them in New York, drinking a lot of medicine and producing events. And I kind of burnt out and went through a really bad breakup. And that breakup was the first of a series of breakups that started to bring me slowly back from spirit world, slowly back from this heightened focus on the mystical, the unseen, and back into relationship and the horizontal, not just the vertical aspect of life. And that breakup changed me. The woman I was with jumped into someone, a close friend of mine in the community that I was stewarding, and I couldn't face it, and I didn't want to go back, and I ended up moving to California, and a whole new chapter of my life started then. I go out to California and basically start a new life in Ojai, California, and this breakup had really rocked me, and I met a new teacher that I started working with, and I went back down to Costa Rica where I would go and try to heal from this breakup. And I had some really powerful peak experiences without any medicine. I would wake up sobbing every morning, just totally devastated. The person I thought I was going to marry, was totally in love with, had, you know, essentially within 2 weeks of breaking up, jumped into something with a friend in my community. And this is the first time I experienced my guides, my spirit guides. And I would wake up crying every day. I would sit up to meditate, and I would just start to be shown, told things, and really have powerful mystical experiences. And one day my guides took me up out of my body completely without any medicine and brought me to what they said was the origin point of my soul's decision to enter into the space-time experience known as Earth. So it was like almost like a scaffolding, if you will, of looking down at Earth, like you're going to jump off a like a diving board into Earth. Not exactly like that. It's the best analogy that I could give you. But it wasn't Earth. It was like a topographic map of all my incarnations. And each section of the map could have been hundreds, even thousands of incarnations in one area for one lesson, for one emotion, and it was absolutely overwhelming for my consciousness to perceive all of my incarnations simultaneously. Like, it was maddening on some level, but also really cool. And they were like, see all those lifetimes? All of those lifetimes are for this lifetime. You're going to go back and you're going to be collecting the gifts that you cultivated from those lifetimes, bringing them back to you to utilize in service, and you're going to be transmuting the distortions. For example, like a lineage. If you're a warrior, which I was a lot of lifetimes as a warrior or a monk, it's like, okay, you're not meant to be a renunciate in this lifetime, but use this practice, but be in the world. Or you're a warrior in this lifetime, but use the courage without the violence, right? So like this kind of thing is what they were transmitting to me. And so I get thrusted back in my body after, again, this is like very similar level of impact in that original awakening that I had. And I go thrusted back in my body, and I'm like crying and laughing for about 30 minutes and having what's called like a Kundalini awakening, where my whole nervous system is just shaking and sweating. And after that, I could perceive the Akashic records, and it was extremely disorienting for about a year and a half, where I would have my other lifetimes kind of bleed into this one. Be walking down the street in New York and see a group in the distance and reach for my katana and there's no sword. Or I'm getting ready to leave Costa Rica and I'm like, where are my orange robes and why do I have this big backpack? You know, like a renunciate yogi lifetime. And then I started to like interface with people, and I would see like their biggest challenge as a soul in this lifetime and their biggest gift. And I wouldn't say anything without consent, obviously. But again, another phase of healing happened. My body was more repaired. I knew myself more. I started to do healing work with people, and I was having people have profound experiences without having too much knowledge other than trusting my intuition enough. And I started to train more with my Native American teachers and learning protocols for healing and songs and ways of healing the spirit and the soul and reconnecting with the ancestors in the earth. And it was a really powerful next chapter of my life was doing that healing work. And yeah, and basically that was all within the first sort of 5 years of my spiritual awakening up to 2006 is when it happened, to about 2012 is when this went down. And basically over the last number of years, because I want to wind down my story, I've been on an arc of reconciling with all the incarnations that I've had, coming back down to be in relationship with the world and with other human beings, and not be special or better than just because I have some spiritual gifts or mystical gifts, and learn what it means to shift culture and be a business owner and be a good partner, be a good brother to my fellow human beings. And it started to move into expression and culture and hip hop and storytelling. And now here I am 20 years later from that peak experience. And I guess to close out, I'll share that I had a near-death experience in 2020 in Bali from dengue fever. And I left my body for about 2 minutes. And my partner at the time resuscitated me. And when I came back, I didn't have any fear in my body. I knew that what had happened, even though it was disorienting, and I was just completely gone for, like, I was there, I went to use the bathroom, left my body, came back on this sort of golden DMT light bridge. I went into that similar void place that I went on T, that first time I had that peak experience where like the living stillness of the universe, like I kind of merged with that, but it was more of a tense merger. So I was just gone, and I didn't have any memory. I didn't go through like a tunnel. I wasn't met by any beings. It was just like the empty void of the universe. And the next thing I know, I'm traveling back down to my body on this DMT light bridge. And when I get back in my body, I feel this sort of golden Christ heavenly energy pouring into my nervous system. And I don't have any fear. And she's freaked out. She's like, you were gone. She's crying. I'm like, call an ambulance. I'm okay. I'm back. I'm here. And I spent like a week in the hospital in this very intense shamanic fever state as COVID was like sweeping the planet. Because I thought I had it. It was like 2 weeks into the pandemic. And I remember like having all these past life memories of dying from fever. And I would come out of like my sort of fever state, and I'm in a castle in Scotland with my wife and child and a mortal wound from the battlefield, and I go back to sleep, and I wake up and I'm a kid in Calcutta dying, and then go back to sleep. So I just had serious like lifetime after lifetime of dying from fever, and then also seeing COVID like sweeping the planet. And then I leave the hospital, and you know, mind you, I've had countless medicine journeys at this point. Well, it was like almost 15 years of mystical experiences and training, and I was having a really hard time sense making what had happened to me. And it's kind of like, you know, if you like unplug the Wi-Fi and you wait like 2 minutes and you plug it in and like resets it, I feel like that's what happened to me. So whatever degrees of veils that I had as a mystic or a healer were just annihilated at this point. But there was a part of my humanity that was like, what's the point? I was just gone. There was no special white, like there was nothing. I was just gone, and then I was back. Like, what am I doing here? And like a lot of my ambitions, it was just so transpersonal. I had a hard time reconciling with what I was doing. But I didn't have any fear, and I felt like there was so much fear on the planet. And I get my strength back enough because I was bedridden for like a bit, and I go up on a motorbike ride, and I'm, you know, just out and driving around a boot, and I get this, I'm in this contemplation of like, why am I here? Why are we here? Why am I here? And I'm just asking that again and again, why am I here? Why am I still here? Why am I here? And I think of a really dear brother of mine who's seen me, who's also like a very mystical man that's been walking a path of initiation for a long time too. We've seen each other through some really intense initiations, and thinking of him opened my heart, and I felt all this love and gratitude. And then it hit me. I'm like, oh, we're here for each other. And it wasn't just him. It was like all the people that are going through initiations, all the beings around the world that are here to hold a field of love, of unconditional love for humanity's transition right now. That's why I'm here. That's why we're here. And it all made sense. And the level of like gratitude tears and just enoughness and soul explosions were quite ecstatic. And I came back, and I told my partner and integrated, and basically over the coming days, I had been in a sabbatical for a year up from that point. I closed my coaching practice. I had closed everything a year before, and they were like, your mystical hiatus is over, because I had just dropped everything and just went to Bali and was like in complete rest mode, and your mystical sabbatical's over, and by the way, you're a bard and you need to start working with leaders again. And I'm like, what's a bard? And I started going down the rabbit hole of the bard. And Celtic mythology was a druid that trained 20 years to prepare them to share a transmission to their tribe and to the people. And when the Romans were waging their war campaign on the Germanic tribes of Europe, and they got to Ireland, they came across the fiercest tribe that they had ever come across. And it's like the front line would get the strength of 10 men, and they were freaked out by it. And they realized that there was all these singers at the back line that were singing these ancestral songs that would give the front line the strength of the ancestors. So the first thing they did to conquer Ireland was they waged an assassination campaign on the bards. And so I was having this very visceral reaction to this information as I was discovering it. And I'm like, wow, it's been about 20 years. And I transitioned from Alokananda to Luke Kohen. I like took my name back, and it was a gradual process. I had already started the process in 2018, and now it's 2020, and I was like, I need to like rebrand and come out, and I'm a bard. And it felt true. And it was like, because I went so transpersonal with the near-death experience, I didn't know how to like relate to, like, it's hard to relate to society when you're a very multidimensional being and you're like, don't fit into literally any box. And yet you get all these projections that say, oh, you're just a bro, or you're just this, or you're a wizard, or you're a blah, 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 whatever. It's like all of it and none of it. But the bard thing was like, cool, that's a way that I could self-identify. And I started to make hip hop and spoken word and bring myself back out there and kind of transmit all these crazy mystical experiences and really human, challenging experiences like breakups and addictions and all the things I lived through, and start to put it into the form of music and storytelling, and started to share the tools that I learned to heal myself in a new way. And yeah, came back out into the world as Luke Kohen, and I've been gradually doing that more and more, slowly but surely, coming out of hiding as a mystic, but also just being a human being that's here to love people exactly where they are and share some of the things I've learned along the way, because it's been literally 20 years. Like this month, I turned 42. So 22 is when the healing crisis happened. So I'm here 20 years later, seeing what's happening on the planet and just being like, okay, like we got some work to do. And I believe that many people are going to go through some version of what I went through, whether it's a near-death experience, a breakup, addiction, a loss of a loved one. Like I've actually done surveys on how people get on the spiritual path, and it's one of the 10 things that I've gone through was the thing. And so I just went through a series of them, but I can relate to anyone because I've gone through like all of that kind of stuff. So I've come to know at this point that what we have in common is trauma. Like what makes us all related is that we're a spiritual being having a human experience, and we all have a certain degree of trauma, lineage-wise, culturally, family, and that if we can learn to have curiosity and empathy for the trauma that we're each in the process of healing, we can bridge the divide of culture and socioeconomic and race, and which is all important stuff that we get to heal as a collective. But when it comes to the individual experience and having empathy for their lived experience, having empathy for the journey that we've been on, when we learn someone's story, usually our judgments and projections change. Like I love learning people's stories because I get to see how judgmental the mind is in its conditioning. And we think we know what someone's endured, and we have no idea. Then you realize, like, oh wow, we actually have more in common than we have anything different. And so I think that's so important in our day and age, to bridge the gap. And so thank you for listening to my story today. I know it was a bit of an arc, and I appreciate going on that journey with me. There's obviously a lot of other things that happened, but that's my best way that I could summarize it for the most part in the time that I have. And if you're interested in what I'm up to, and I try to share as much inspiration and empowerment in these times as possible, you could follow me at Luke Kohen, and that's Kohen. My Spotify, my Instagram, my website, it's all Luke Kohen. Thank you so much for exploring my story. It's obviously a lot that I could have covered and a lot more in there, but overall, that's the scope of 20 years in a nutshell, is trying to cover the biggest moments. And if you're curious of what I'm up to now and how I empower people in these crazy times, you can find out where I'm at through the description below.